Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Anna Reyes, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so pleased to introduce this virtual event celebrating Bookstore Romance Day. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. This panel and today's events are in celebration of Bookstore Romance Day, founded by bookseller Billy Blowbaum. This day is designed to give independent bookstores an opportunity to celebrate romance fiction and to strengthen the relationships between bookstores and the romance community. Harvard Bookstore is thrilled to partner with indie bookstores across the country in dedicating a day to this diverse genre that always promises a happy ending. Before we get started, I'd like to share with you the lineup for the rest of today. Stop by the store in Cambridge, Mass. to browse our blind date with a book display today and tomorrow. At 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern Time, join our Instagram Lives with young adult romance writers Rachel Lynn Solomon and Adiba J. Deardar. And at 7 Eastern Time, join our second virtual panel with Olivia Waite, Alyssa Cole, Kosoko Jackson, Anita Kelly, Alexandria Bellefleur, moderated by Cecilia Tan. This afternoon's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. So if you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk, click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. This event also has auto-generated closed captioning available. Depending on the version of Zoom you're using, you may need to enable the captions yourself by clicking on the closed caption button on your screen. You can also disable captions there as well. In the chat, I'll be posting the links to purchase the featured books at harvard.com. Your purchases truly make events like today's possible and help ensure the future of this landmark independent bookstore. So as always, thank you. And now I'm delighted to introduce today's panelists. Adriana Herrera was born and raised in the Caribbean and is a US Today best-selling author. She is an outspoken advocate for diversity in romance and is one of the co-creators of the Queer Romance POC Collective. Her most recent book, A Caribbean Heiress in Paris, is the first in the Las Leonoas series. Ashley Herring Blake is an award-winning author of the romance novel Delilah Green Doesn't Care, and the forthcoming Ashford Parker Doesn't Fail. She is also a co-editor on the young adult romance anthology Fools in Love. KATEE Robert is a New York Times and USA bestselling author of contemporary romance and romantic suspense. Entertainment Weekly calls her writing unspeakably hot. Wicked Beauty is the fourth installment in her Dark Olympus series. Olivia Dade is the author of Body Romances with a Big Heart. Romance author Mia Sosa says, if you're a fan of romances that feature nuanced protagonist, whip-smart dialogue, and scorching chemistry and wide-splitting humor, look no further than Olivia Dade's books. Her upcoming release, Shipwrecked, is her third book in the Spoiler Alert series. This event will be moderated by Sally Bremer, Marketing and Events Coordinator at Harvard Bookstore and avid romance reader. We are so excited to welcome everyone today to this event, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to all of these wonderful people who are here today, both on the panel and in our audience. I'm so glad you decided to join us in celebrating Bookstore Romance Day, which is a nationwide celebration that includes Canada as well. They've branched out into different countries, which is exciting. I wanted to start out today with a little bit of a general question, and one that I'm super interested in is why romance? What drew you to write within this genre and this happy ending filled genre? Ashley, why don't you get started?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Glad to be here. So Well, romance, I've always read romance. I've always been a romance reader. But I started writing my career in kid lit. So I was writing middle grade books, I was writing young adult books. Um, and I always had kind of in the back of my mind that I eventually wanted to write an adult book. But I couldn't really decide what kind of adult book I wanted to write because I mean, I like writing. I mean, I like reading just contemporary adult. I like reading all kinds of adult books. And then probably, this will come as a surprise to no one, the pandemic hit. And I was like, I just need something happy that's going to be fun to write and something that's going to make me smile and feel good. And that's how Delilah started. I started writing that in April 2020. So, we'd all been sent home in March from work and whatnot of 2020. And so I started that book in April. And then I just completely fell in love with writing it. It was just such a different experience from writing, admittedly, my slightly angsty kidlit books. And while I think Delilah's still a little bit angsty, it was just such a refreshing experience to write something where I knew that despite, character development and plot struggles, because I struggle with plot, I knew my goal was just to get these two people together. And it was just wonderful just to know that that was my end goal. And to just kind of discover how to do that. So it was just something that I fell into because of just the hard time we were all going through, and I'm completely hooked now. So
I love that so much. I love how many books have come out of the pandemic, and
yeah,
so many of them are that happy ending, something good and light and fluffy, because there was so much that wasn't good and light and fluffy going on. Adriana?
Let's see. I don't know. I mean, I feel like for me, I've been a lifelong reader of romance since I was like too young, probably. And it didn't even occur to me that I could write something that wasn't romance when I decided to like actually sit down and write a book. It's what I go to always for comfort. I read a lot of different things, but that's like my go-to for like comfort or like my for sure thing. And so I actually have, wrote a lot of like Buffy fanfic in my day. But I had not actually like thought of like writing a novel with the thought of like other people reading it and like perhaps even buying it until another dark time that we've had recently, which was around the 2016 election. Around that time, I just went to romance as I always do to find comfort because things felt so fraught. And I became like increasingly frustrated that I couldn't find romance with characters that had my specific background, like that were from the Afro-Caribbean, that were bisexual, that were immigrants, like all those things together. I couldn't find it in a book. And I needed to see my specific self in a book. And so that was like kind of like what pushed me finally to do it. But honestly, like it wouldn't have occurred to me to write anything else once I actually sat down to do it.
Yeah, I love that. Romance is definitely a genre that I go to. If I'm like, I don't know what I want to read next, and fantasy feels really daunting, I will absolutely go to a romance and just dig into that. Summer for me is romance reading time, so I've been just digging into a whole bunch of those recently. Olivia, why romance?
Like Adriana, I'm a lifelong romance reader. I think the draw for me from an extremely young age, like as Adriana said, way too young an age, probably 6 or 7 for me, I started reading them like adult romance, is because I think I grew up under somewhat fraught family circumstances. And I think it was deeply comforting to me to read stories where there was a guaranteed happiness at the end, that there were couples and often families where even if they went through difficult times, that there was happiness and joy and love at the end of that. And I think I really craved that. And I did read other genres growing up, but I will say that particularly as around 2016 so forth, my genre reading in other genres narrowed significantly because I just desperately needed the promise of a happy ending, because particularly if you're someone who has anxiety as I do, it's very comforting. Even within romance, I will sometimes flip ahead to the end if I get too anxious during the bleak moments in the story, because I want to serve the, again, it's silly. I know how it's going to end, but of course that's a sign of a great author, is they can make you question it, even as you know that it's going to be that way. So, and I think the beauty of romance, and why I've never tired of it after almost 40 years, is that romance encompasses every other genre in a way which I think is really incredible. You can read science fiction romances, or romances with mysteries, romantic suspense, and erotic romances, sweet romance, and almost any plot that you can think of that you would see in another genre. I mean, I've read zombie, like post-apocalyptic romance, and loved it. So I think part of the reason I never got tired of it was because it encompasses anything, almost anything I could be interested in reading and in writing. So like Adriana, when I started writing, which wasn't that long ago, 2014, I never thought of anything else.
Yeah, I definitely remember as a kid in stories, in movies or books or anything else, I was always focused on the romance. And I was rewatching Star Wars recently, and the first, like the prequels, and like Anakin and Padme and their dramatic love story. And I was watching it as an adult and went, there's actual like politics and a storyline and like some other things going on. But as a kid, all I cared about was their dramatic love story. Yeah, Katie, why romance?
So I came to romance in a really roundabout way. That I had read my first romance, like a lot of people, at like 12, 13, 14-ish. But I thought that author was the only person doing that. I didn't realize there was a whole entire genre. Because my mom was not a romance reader. And so like I feel like a lot of people got it from like family members, and I did not. But in the early aughts, like the urban fantasy heyday, the thing that I loved most about those books was the romantic subplots. And they were never, with the exception of like the Kate Daniels, and I mean there's others, but like it was always like, it would hurt me. It just constantly hurt me, because it's like we almost got a happily ever after, and then they ripped it away because the series was not over. And so when I started writing in like, oh God, like 2010 or 2011-ish, I didn't intentionally decide to set out to write romance, but romantic subplots featured so heavily in the books I was writing that when I finally sold the book, it was sci-fi romance. And I was like, oh, I guess that's what I'm writing. And that's just kind of like where I ended up. And like Olivia said, there's so many different variants and ways that you can like, or subgenres that you can write in romance. Like I was recently asked, like, when are you gonna write something that's not romance? I'm like, never. Why would I? Like I can write literally anything I want, and I have my soft landing. And that is so important to me, both as a writer and as a reader. And while I do read stuff that's not romance, obviously, like as somebody also with anxiety, it's very comforting to know that when I get to the end, no matter how harrowing the journey is, like it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And that's really important to me. And the fact that I'm allowed to like give that experience to readers is also very important to me too. Because it's like, here's a soft spot for you. Like life sucks right now. Like here's an escape for you. So that's why romance forever.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. As we've been talking about, romance is great because it is so reliable. And one of those reliable things about romance is the tropes, and the one bed trope, and the enemies to lovers, and all of the fun ways that people try to get, or authors try to get people together and in compromising situations. Do you have any favorite tropes? Do you have your own favorite tropes to write or to read? And how do you use them to your advantage without getting repetitive? If anybody wants to jump in on that.
I think I mean, I've been reading romance for a long time, but I think I left romance like in my 20s and came back to it in the early aughts, where like the urban fantasy paranormal heyday, like Presley Cole, Patricia Briggs, Janine Frost, all those books were like coming out. And I think fated mates insta love is like my favorite thing. Like I just love like that trope. And I mean, forced proximity, all the things that led themselves for there to be like a lot of like tension and chemistry. But my forever favorite is like a werewolf that gets a whiff of something and his entire life is changed instantly.
I'm kind of a sucker for grumpy sunshine. Like I just love seeing someone who is an absolute just horror of a person just get softened by this, little cupcake. And that's one that I just love seeing, and I love seeing it kind of flipped where you don't expect the character to be the one who's the grumpy one or in the sunshine. And I just love, what I really love though is when seeing all of these beloved tropes, and like I love grumpy sunshine, I love enemies to lovers, fake dating. Like in my brain, fake dating, I'm like, who would ever fake date? Like I know it has happened in actual reality, but like fake dating sounds so absurd to me when I actually think about it. And then as soon as I read a book that has fake dating, I'm like, yes, obviously they have fake date, must fake date immediately. And I just really, right now I write queer romance, so I love seeing these tropes brought into these queer relationships and writing that and reading that and seeing them, reimagined and redone. Because I know a lot of times in the romance community, I'll see like, oh, this trope is so overdone. And I'm like, it's not overdone. It's not overdone, because we need to see it with queer characters, and we need to see it with characters of color, and we need to see it with disabled characters. And that's, I think, what romance is really hungry for. So, and I love how we're seeing a lot of these tropes done in these ways that we haven't seen before. So that's what I really love. But Grumpy Sunshine is definitely probably my favorite, which is what Delilah and Claire are. So yeah.
And I love it so much.
I'm a forced proximity person. I want them on the page together as soon and as much as possible. So I am shameless about putting them in situations where they have no escape from one another for reasons. There's always theoretically a legitimate reason, but the reason is I just don't want them to be not on the page together very much, which is why the only romantic mysteries that I can read are ones when they're sort of investigating together. Like most of the time, I love those, but the ones where they're off the page with one another and like investigating on their own, I just flip to when they're together again. I don't care who murdered someone. Like, I just want to watch the romantic arc play out. I'm probably not what they would consider the best reader of romantic mysteries, but that's what I love. So that's what I do. And like Ashley was saying, a lot of times, yeah, people say tropes are played out. Often when marginalized authors start writing a lot of those tropes. And so I think that is something that happens. So all the tropes with the people who always wanted to see themselves on the page, when, with characters who are like them, experiencing those tropes, I think people are still hungry for that. And that's also true with my books. Part of what I want is to have, fat characters with every trope possible. So
I also think that like the tropes are played out conversation is like very silly to me, because how many Beauty and the Beast retellings have I read? And like all an author has to say is it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I'm like, cool, 5001. I'm ready. Read it. Give it to me. I love enemies to lovers. Like I love it. There's so many different variations you can play out. But I think my favorite right now is like marriage of convenience / fake dating / like forced marriage, like because it puts you in this like really intimate, or these characters in these really intimate situations where they're either strangers or they hate each other, or like they are not choosing to be in this intimate situation. And then which leads to my favorite dynamic in ever which is like, this is just pretend, but like it feels real, but it's pretend. Like they don't really like me. I know they don't. And for me, I really love writing that. And so but I don't write historical, and most of my stuff's not like paranormal. So it's, how do you write a marriage of convenience in a contemporary type story and make it like, and be able to sell it to readers? And like, that's a challenge that I really enjoy. But yeah, I don't think tropes can be played out. I think people who say that are just salty and also trying to close the door on like people telling the stories that aren't like quote unquote right. And it's silly. It's absolutely silly. You can never play out a trope. They're tropes for a reason.
Yeah, I also think those people often haven't read enough romance and enough diverse romance, as we were saying, that a trope being played out is not actually, it's not real. it's a thing that goes bump in the night. Let's see, Ashley, with Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which is one of my favorite books of this year. I love it so much. It's technically a small town romance, but it doesn't feel that way when you're reading it. It feels a little bit more expansive and less like, oh, we're stuck in this small town and I hate everything about this small town and whatever. Was this on purpose to avoid that, I guess, trope or cliche, or just something born of the way that the characters interact with the story?
I mean, I'd love to say it was on purpose. I'd like to think everything that I do in the book is on purpose. I think that's just kind of naturally what happened and how it felt, because Delilah was from, she kind of bridged the gap between the two. Claire had been in Bright Falls for her entire life, didn't even go away to college because she got pregnant at 19. But Delilah, had left and gone to New York and became a New Yorker in every sense of the word, location and attitude. And just everything that she encompassed was very city feel. So I think that having her perspective for half the book kind of gave it that more expansive feel, where it didn't feel like the characters were trapped in this town, and kind of also just always looming that she would go back to New York City. I love small town romances. Like, I can't seem to write one yet in a big city. I think it's because I like making up towns. So because I'm like, I mean, there's some that's in New York. I'm in Heiress's book that's in Portland, and a little bit in New York too. So, and I can't make those towns up, and so I have to like really make sure they're, that's really like kind of some of the only research I do as a contemporary writer is places and streets, and even for places I've been to, I still need to look it up. So I think I love small town because I can just make up a city and just do whatever I want with it. But yeah, I think that, having Delilah in New York kind of helped make it feel like it was a little bit bigger than Bright Falls from the beginning.
Yeah, I also feel like small towns lend themselves really easily to like compromising positions of like, oh no, our neighbor Sue saw us kissing on the front porch. Drama can stem from that. And
I mean, it's harder to hide in a small town. Like everybody knows your business, everybody's all up in it, and that's why we love in romances when, the romance is literally chasing these characters down who are trying to hide from it. But
you mentioned research, and your research in contemporary being more of just the towns and things like that. But Adriana, your book is set in the past and set in this historical place. And what was that research process like, and why 1890s Paris in the World's Fair?
It was a lot more research than I do for contemporary, like by 1,000. Well, the reason why was because I randomly found an article from a Dominican newspaper. I'm from the Dominican Republic, saying that the Dominican Republic was an exhibitor at the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, which was the celebration of the centennial of the Revolution, and where the Eiffel Tower, among a lot of other things, was debuted. So I was like, we were where? Like, I had no idea that the Dominican Republic was there. And then after doing a lot more research, I found that 13 other countries, in addition to the DR, were also at that fair, and that like about 6,000 Latin exhibitors came to Paris that year. And they all had these pavilions built around the Eiffel Tower. And there's like all kinds of archives and guidebooks and things like this about this fair. Like, the French basically said this will be like the biggest event the world has ever seen. And it truly was like the first truly global event that happened in world history. Like 32 million people came to Paris that year. So the setting itself was kind of like just like there for me to explore. And then once I decided I wanted to do like the first book kind of like revolving around distilling, then I did like a lot, like there's a Dominican Studies Institute here in the City College of New York, which the librarian there is like my best friend now. And he sent me a ton of like great information about what business was like in the DR at that time. So, I mean, it's just been interesting in general. Right now I'm writing the second book, which is a lesbian romance. It's Manuela, who's one of the friends from the three best friends, and she is an artist, and she gets she makes a bargain with a duchess who is also Latina. Her father is Chilean. So it's just been interesting to research just how gay Paris was in 1889. Like there were so many women who were openly gay, who were living in partnerships and were just like gay and happy and had publicly having these relationships. So it's just been interesting to read about it, all the bars, and just to the degree where like people could live openly, and yet it's not something that we see in historical romance as much as we should. Like there's always these like stories that are couched on the idea that like everything had to be secret, but the reality was that it wasn't.
If you're in the audience and you've ever wanted a spicy scene on top of the Eiffel Tower, then you should read A Caribbean Heiress in Paris. It was, I think I was reading it on a bus and I was like, oh my God.
I mean, it was right there. Like I have the Eiffel Tower. I might as well just do a sex scene there.
I love it. I love it so much. One thing that I am really fascinated with the romance genre, and especially post-pandemic, whatever you want to call it, like 2 years into the pandemic, kind of the things that are affecting the romance genre. One of those is this huge rise in social media and the way that we all connected with each other through TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. When we weren't able to be in person, a lot of people turned to those apps and started talking about books. And I know, at least at Harvard Bookstore, like our romance section after like pandemic times has just exploded because people are talking about these books. And I am constantly scrolling and getting recommendations. And I know, Katie, you're on TikTok, everybody here is on Instagram. And how has that rise in social media and that like being a huge way to talk about books change the way you write, either in what you write or your writing process or the marketing process of writing a book? I'm curious to hear more about that.
I'll go first. It hasn't changed anything. For me anyways, I've been doing this like forever now, like I'm ancient in romance years. And I learned pretty early on that what readers think they want and what they actually want, or sorry, what they like say, like if they're like, hey, I want this book next. It's like, well, you think you want that, but sometimes if I do that, if I give you what you want instead of how I planned it out, you're actually going to be really unhappy with me because it's not going to be the story that I intend to tell. I do think that there's been some really interesting, like, because indie romance allows people, or indie publishing allows people to write so quickly so they can write to a demand really fast. I think we've seen a bit of that, which is prolonged sales bumps, I guess. And it has been really, really awesome to see, like you said, like the TikTok in particular has brought a whole new readership that haven't read since high school or college and didn't know that they could read and enjoy books. Like, yeah, it's really interesting to watch that play out because they're having conversations and dialogue and discourse that like seasoned romance readers we've had years ago, but it's, you know, new community, they have to go through these things. And the fact that they read really heavily in print is really interesting to me. And I don't know, I feel very protective of the new readership that I'm like, yes, come in, read all the books, like, you know, have this discourse, learn stuff. I just think it's really awesome. And I think it's really great that they read in print because it allows for them to like support indie bookstores and allows indie bookstores to see what readers actually want to read, because I think that a lot of indie bookstores are not as open to romance as, you know, we'd like them to be. And so building those communities is so important. And you can see the ones that are putting in the work because they have a robust romance section. People feel comfortable going in and being like, so there's these books about these like blue aliens, like, is it okay, like, can I have this? And like, if your customers feel comfortable like asking for that, that means you're doing something right. And sorry, I just like rabbit hole there, but yeah, it hasn't changed like how I operate for the most part, just because, you know, I'm a zigzagger, but it's been really interesting just watching from like a industry standpoint, because I think that these new readers are going to make really interesting waves, and similar to when 50 Shades came out in like 2010, 2012, a significant portion of those people who came to romance for the first time are still, you know, they're my core readership like 10, 12 years later. And so I think that that'll be the case with these brand new readers, is that they're going to be here for the long haul, and their tastes will inform the industry for the next, you know, decade plus. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those new readers who stopped reading after high school, college, and then somebody handed me a romance book and I read it in like 2 days during like one of the busiest parts of my year and went, I need more. And then the pandemic happened and I was like, oh, I have all this time to read, and it was perfect. And so yeah, I definitely am one of those new readers and will be here for a while fighting for romance, especially at indie bookstores. Anybody else, any thoughts on social media?
I mean, specifically from an author perspective, I think it would be difficult with the rise of different platforms, rise and fall of different platforms. I think it would be difficult to have a substantial presence on all of them. I think choices have to be made at some point. Maybe not by everyone, but I think by most of us, because if you want to actually, say, write books, then you can't spend, well, you might spend a lot of your time on social media, as I do, but you can't spend all of it on social media. And then that means you've got to make choices. Like, I decided that I was not naturally someone who would do well on TikTok, so I didn't do that. I had major issues with Facebook, so I'm not on Facebook as an author. I was originally, but I'm not anymore. And in fact, I'm not on Instagram either. I parked a spot just so I could do Instagram lives, but because Facebook owns Instagram, I was out. So my only real social media is Twitter. So, and I try to do that relatively well. It feels like my natural home. But I know that I'm missing swaths of readers, current readers, potential readers. Katie's hitting on TikTok and other people are hitting on Facebook. But a lot of it just depends on how much energy and how much time you have. And so you've got to make choices. I will say that my life, as far as my online life, actually did not change that much during the pandemic. I was ready for the pandemic because most of my life occurred online anyway. I lived in sort of a small rural Maryland town before we moved to Sweden. I didn't have really a great community there, so my friends were all online anyway. So my life did not really change significantly because I'm a hermit. So.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting to watch just how much romance has grown with like social media and people, like Katie said, people discovering it, that reading doesn't have to be, I don't know, when I grew up, I was like going from young adult fiction to literary fiction and women's fiction, no thank you, and just never read again. And so I love that not only romance is being read widely by these people who stopped reading, but it also is becoming less of a taboo, I think, because of the people are talking about it and people are seeing the big blue aliens on TikTok that are now everywhere in bookstores. And so I find that really fascinating. I'm going to take a hard left turn and just bear with me, but I feel like it wouldn't be a romance panel without talking about spicy scenes and those those the huge reason why people are reading romance books. Where do you start with those? How do you write about who puts what where, both arms and legs and other appendages, without it sounding like stage directions and he puts this there and does this and very robotic? Curious about that process.
All right, I'll go.
Yeah.
It's fine. So when I craft my story, I'm a character first writer. And so the sex scenes actually are informed really heavily by the characters themselves, which is why it never feels old, because it's always, the acts, there's only so many acts that you can do, but because they're these specific characters, it feels fresh and new every single time. I will say that when I'm like not feeling it, either I'll skip the sex scene or I will just sketch out the acts that they're doing or the dialogue or whatever, and then go back in and filter in the like emotional component and the thought process. And like, because you can't just do like tab A slot B, you have to be like, well, they're feeling this, they're doing this, like here's the conversation they're having in the midst of it. But yeah, so that's usually my recommendation, like for like new authors who are like intimidated by writing sex scenes and just being like, I don't know even where to start, is it's like, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time through. You can sketch out like the actions, and then you can go back in and add dialogue, and then you can go back in again and add the emotional component, and like there's no limit to the amount of times you can go back through and edit and like add and flesh out these sex scenes. But yeah, I don't even usually like plan like what, because I write a lot of like kinky various stuff. I don't usually even plan like what kinks they'll have until I'm in the midst of it and being like, oh, I guess you're into this. That's awesome. So I'm like a more intuitive writer. So it's very an exploration process with each sex scene I write that is always really entertaining.
Yeah, I am also kind of intuitive, but I know there's gonna be sex because getting to write sex scenes in books is why I get to this desk every morning. So I know it's gonna have a lot of it, or some of it at least, and it's probably gonna be like graphic descriptions of it. So, but it's really kind of like informed by what's happening in the dynamics of the relationship. And I don't try to like be hard on myself in terms of like, oh, like these three acts of like sexy things happen in this previous book and I'm writing them again. Well, I think I've let myself kind of like be okay what there are things that I find particularly delicious to write and read. Like there are things that I can read that two people do in a book, in a romance novel, and I can read it 100 times, and 100 times it will be hot and delicious and sexy for me. So I just kind of let myself like do those things that to me are particularly hot or just like really work in terms of like what I like to do. Katie and I are in a bonkers series, bonkers romance series, and it was my first time writing like a serpent demon, and snakes have two penises, so like it was like an interesting research process, but I had to like really kind of think about like how am I going to do this in terms of like choreography, like things that need to happen in a sex scene. And so the sky's the limit with romance in terms of kinky, sexy things that you find. If I find it hot, my rule is if I find it hot and delicious, chances are other people will too. There'll be other people out there that will want to read it.
Yeah, I haven't made the deep dive into paranormal like monster romances yet, and I like am inching my way slowly into that. We'll see. I have so many books on my TBR, but that's coming up on my horizon of reading. Ashley, did you have any thoughts about spicy scenes?
Yeah, I mean, to echo both Adriana and Katie, like the sex scene is what I'm there to do. Like I am writing, even if they don't do it to like 50,000 words, 60,000 words, I am there writing those 50,000 words to get to the sex scene. So it's like one of my favorite things to write. It gets interesting. I always write romance in third person, at least right now. And so far, both characters in both my romances have, well, three now because I've written Heiress's book. They all use she, her pronouns. So it gets very interesting with all the she's and the hers. And is it clear whose body part that is, or do I need to put in the name? So I feel like it's just like a constant explosion of she's and hers and names. But so that's been interesting to kind of maneuver that in a FF sex scene. And, you know, and I would just echo kind of what Katie says, like I write from an emotional place and where those characters are emotionally. Why are they having this sex right now? What are they thinking when they're with this partner, and what is the other person thinking? And so I definitely kind of start there and think about, you know, where they are emotionally. And that's one of my favorite things about writing sex scenes, is that it can be hot and sexy and spicy, but then weaving in those emotional pieces in between that is what I really enjoy doing, and I love reading that too. You know, and as far as like how to do it, like I mean, I think kind of what Katie says too is just taking it a piece at a time, and, you know, breaking it down and kind of thinking about, you know, what are the actual blocked scenes, and sketch that out if you need to do that first, and then add the emotion in, or both. I kind of do it all at once. And then I'll go back, and I'm an edit while I write a writer. I do not just like throw things on the page and move on. Like, I cannot do that. Wonderful if it works for you. People are like, turn off your inner editor. I'm like, no, I cannot. I have to make it at least kind of like the emotional tone of it, where I thought I was going before I can move on. And so, you know, especially with those sex scenes too, I'll write the sex scene and then I'll go back and I'll nitpick each line before I even move on. And like, oh wait, is it clear what she's feeling here, or what they're feeling here, or what he's feeling here? And you know, like, again, like, and I teach writing too to middle schoolers, and I always tell them to get them started. And I think the same thing applies to writing a sex scene, is that nothing is set in stone. That's what writing is. It's rewriting. So just throw it out there and then go back and fix it, and go back and fix it again and again and again, until it's, you know, where you want at whatever point in your writing process you are editing. Obviously different for everybody. So, yeah.
I do have one last thing on like how you avoid three arms, or like, especially when you're writing thruples. Barbies. There are the bendy Barbies, and I actually bought some like when I first started writing menages, because like visually you can make sure that, like, one, it's possible to do with human bodies, and two, to make sure no one's sprouting an extra leg in the sex scene. So if you're a visual person, that's a really great option. That they're like $15 a pop, and will save you some really interesting editing notes later.
I feel like that's not what Barbie had in mind when they designed their their dolls, but I appreciate it. I love it. Olivia, any thoughts?
I chatted with Jess Michaels once. She writes historical romances, and she said, and I think this is often true, I'm sure not always, is that a lot of writers who do write sex scenes in their books fall into two camps. There is the camp of people that it's deeply painful. It takes them a long time. They're thinking a lot during it as they write their sex scene. And then there are people like me, frankly, Jess, where it's like free words. And generally, like everyone was saying, if I think like Adriana was saying, if I think something is hot, then I think generally the readers will too. I have found it very much like actual sex. If I get interrupted, it is hard for me to get my groove back in the middle of the sex scene. When I schedule writing a sex scene, I try to schedule enough of a block of time so I can finish writing it, because it's very hard, like to come the next morning at like 8:30 in the morning and be like, there's a lot of like, you're like, I just don't want to deal with that right now. First thing in the morning, it's better for me to finish at least a draft of the scene at one time. There was a point where my mother seemed to call, like literally every time I was writing a sex scene, I would be really into it, and then my mother would call and I'd be like, what's happening here? And so finally I just stopped answering, because I'm like, I will not let this be interrupted. Like, this is going to keep going till the end.
Yeah.
2 sons. I have 2 kids, and I do not have an enclosed office. Like, right where I'm sitting is where I write, and that's our living room. And so they're just like walking around the house all day long. And I distinctly remember writing a sex scene this summer in Iris's book, and my oldest comes up behind me, and I'm just like trying to cover, because he loves peering over my shoulder and seeing what I'm writing. Really, he's looking for cuss words because he's 13. But I'm like, oh God, no, change the screen. So yeah, sometimes I'm like that. I'm like, no, I have to finish it, but also can everyone just not come into this room who lives in my house while I'm doing this?
You know, though, I mean, it might be therapy later on, but like my middle around that age was very nosy as well. And like I left it up one time and he came in and he's just like, Mom. And I was like, that's what you get for being nosy. Now you're
Yeah.
traumatized. I hope you're happy. Like, good job,
I'm
buddy.
pretty sure he found a body part or two, but I was just like, I'm writing I mean, he knows what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm writing a sex scene, go away. You know, like, but then he's obviously 13 and even more curious once I admit what I'm doing, but you know, it is what it is.
That's so funny. Yeah. I never thought about like the fact that writing a sex scene has to be done all at once, because yeah, it makes sense. If you lose that thread, it sometimes is gone. Katie, I have a question for you. Your Dark Olympus series, which unfortunately is the only thing that I've read of yours, but again, my TBR is endless, but I love them all so much. Radiant Sin is like next on my TBR, and it features a world that is both, it's like a weird pocket dimension of our world. Like the United States exists, but Olympus is this weird spot where a little bit of magic exists. There's this hierarchy system of the Greek gods. What is that world building process like, and how do you balance that with the romance elements?
Not well. My editing, my first pass editing is 90% of it is like, Katie, could you build the world here? How about here? Here's a world building opportunity. Can you tell us more about what's going on in the world? Because I focus so heavily on the romance that I'm like, oh, like the world's in my head. Why do you need to know about it? That's silly. Readers need to know about it. But I don't know, it's just been really fun creating this kind of, like you said, it's like a pocket dimension. Like I have never quite fleshed out what happens outside of Olympus, and I probably never will, just because it exists almost like as a fantasy world with like very little magic. And yeah, so the world building is a challenge for me because I tend to skip right over it and just be like, yeah, that exists. And so my editors are like, no, slow down, add it in. So that's where most of my editing is building in the world building elements and like, or explaining the world building elements that are in my head into the story. I don't know if I've ever fully like balanced it properly, like to readers like happiness, but I tend to be a little bit light on that end anyways, just because as much as I enjoy the world that I created and I enjoy like the 13 and all that stuff and like the power and politics and stuff, it's still less interesting to me than the romance. And so the romance will always be the most important part of the story. So if you're looking for like Game of Thrones-esque politics, you'll never find that in my books, because we are Fast and Furious. We are the Fast and Furious version of Game of Thrones. If you want to, like, if I write fantasy, that it's just going to be like, get in, don't ask too many questions. It's going to be sexy. It's going to be hot. It's going to be a wild ride. There'll be some murder. So that is like the reading experience. And so too much world building slows that down for me. So yeah, the balance is tricky. I never quite pull it off, but my editor helps a lot. So it would be way worse without my editor.
That's what they're there for. Yeah, I love the romance stuff. Like I said, I never paid attention to the politics in any piece of media I was watching or reading. And so I appreciate the lack of world building. You've got one fan of that style. Olivia, in all of your spoiler alert books, you have these interstitials with that range from the text threads between the cast members, which I love, and Gods of the Gate fan fiction. And I'm just curious what the process of writing those is, because it's so fun to read them and get this little peek behind the curtain a little bit, but also see the comparisons within the chapters that I'm reading and how they connect to those. And so, yeah, I want to know more.
So the interstitials between chapters, with spoiler alert, I actually wrote them after I'd finished writing the main book, in large part because I was contractually obligated I had to write a hilarious rom-com. It could not just be like a funny rom-com. It had to be contractually hilarious. And I was concerned that, spoiler alert, because it has some heavier themes to it, did not reach a level of hilarity that was I was obligated legally to provide within my text. And so a large part of the function within spoiler alert of the interstitials was to actually make people laugh. And the bonus was that I had such a good time writing like terrible movie scripts. And I got to include just random stuff like the, fridging of particularly female characters. Like one of my themes in all the movie scripts is like the various terrible ways that Hollywood depicts female characters in a variety of ways. But or in other cases, I actually, and I've done this more in the later books where I write them as I'm writing the story. If it's in between those chapters, I write it in between those chapters, is that to see to reinforce whatever is happening emotionally, to sort of play off of something that has been mentioned in the previous chapter. The good news about all the feels was that I felt like it was contractually hilarious without the interstitials because of Alex, who is I find hilarious. So I didn't have as many interstitials there, which was good because I was way over my word count. So I didn't need as many. And I had those be, I think, fewer of them are, I think, as funny, but there's more of an emotional component in those. But it's fun. I think in spoiler alert, there's an interstitial for a movie script, one of Marcus's terrible movie scripts called One Wheel, Two Reel, about a poignant coming of age story of a troubled unicyclist in Portland. And I genuinely think that may be the apex of my literary career. Was my little snippet for One Wheel, Two Reel. But Dosey Danger also.
Contractually hilarious is one of my favorite phrases I think I've ever heard. And I think more people should be contractually hilarious because things get boring sometimes. Let's see. I wanted to go into a few of our Q&A questions from our audience. And we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about writing the sex scenes, but just in general, do you have any advice for someone who's writing their first romance novel, either with the spicy scenes or otherwise?
It's very basic, but write what you want to read. Like write something that you cannot wait to see it on the page. However you write it, even if it's a basic theme like Beauty and the Beast that has been done before, because you are a different person coming with different life experiences, whatever you write is going to be different, is going to be unique to you. And don't be afraid to bring that in. And yeah, write what brings you joy, because what is the point otherwise? I mean, publishing is a hard industry. Writing can be difficult at times. If you're not going to write a story that's going to bring you joy, why are you doing it? I mean, yes, sometimes you're doing it for money, but frankly, that is not a guarantee. If for most beginning writers, that is definitely not a guarantee. So write something that you want to read.
I also piggyback on that. Also, if you're writing for money, romance is probably not the genre to be doing it in. I mean, whatever. But as far as advances go, but my advice, twofold. One is it's the most simplest and most challenging piece is finish the book. Like until you finish the book, like once you finish the book, you can fix it. You can fix anything in a finished book. And piggybacking on that is give yourself permission to write garbage. Like I think that a lot of times when you're first starting out, you're reading these completed romance novels for this take, and you're looking at the completed product and being like, wow, I can never write like this. But like this author did not write like this in their first draft. They wrote garbage. We all write garbage our first draft. Like that's how it works. And then we fix it and polish it, and it goes through an editing process that brings it to the final product that you're reading and it's in your hands. And so giving yourself permission to write garbage allows you to finish the book and then fix it and then polish it. And so I think that is something that sometimes gets lost in writing advice, is because you're so focused on like the final product that you talk yourself out of finishing it, because it's like, I could never be that good. Well, you don't have to be that good. You just got to finish it and then you can fix it.
No. Ashley or Adriana? Any advice for burgeoning romance authors?
I mean, I think basically what both Katie and Olivia said, just like lean into whatever gives you the energy to keep writing, like whatever that is. And like, we now know that literally anything that you write with like joyfully, like people will feel that and love it. Like Ice Planet Barbarians, which like, you know what I mean? Like people love those books. I think there's literally nothing that you will want to write that someone won't want to read, and just lean into whatever it is that gets you those words and like for you to finish your book, because then you can figure it out later. Like Katie said, once the book is written, you can figure it out.
Yeah, just piggybacking on all that. I mean, I felt like told by Olivia. I was like, oh yeah, like I felt reminded too when Olivia shared her advice. So yes, absolutely. And I was an agent for a while, and I had like sometimes my clients would be worried about like, well, I don't know if this is sellable, but I really want to tell the story. And I'm like, so who cares? We'll worry about that later. Tell what you want. Tell the story you want to tell. Market. Sometimes I know people worry about, well, is there a place for this in the market? Well, like Adriana just said, yes. You know, just write the story that makes you happy, that you want to tell, that only you can tell, get it done. And all of those details will come later. Like, you know, there's being a writer and then there's being an author. To me, those are two different things. Author is all the business crap. It's all that stuff that you have to deal with publishers, with events, and it's wonderful stuff a lot of times, but it can get frustrating. You're already a writer, so write your book. And yeah, author can come later.
Yeah, I love all of that so much, and now it's making me want to like get off this call and go like tap 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 on my keyboard.
You should.
Yeah. One of our Q&A questions was what you all are reading right now, and I'm curious about this, but I also know that we were talking before we got on that a lot of you are on deadline. So if you have any romance recommendations in general, it doesn't have to be what you're reading right now. I want to know, and the audience wants to know.
I'll start. I am currently reading Amy Spalding's debut romance, For Her Consideration, which is a queer FF romance set in Hollywood. It's like a kind of up and coming queer star actress who's gaining momentum in her career, and the woman who writes her emails for a talent agency, like she writes her emails to people, and so they kind of have a meeting, and then obviously all this chemistry gets going, and it's really delicious, and I love it. You know, I've read a ton of romance books that I really love lately. Just read Adriana's recently that I adore. Cannot wait to read Olivia's new one. I am honestly, Katie, I've never been super into the the sci-fi romance, but it just really intrigues me. So I'm like, yours are on my TBR, so I'm ready to read those. You know, there's lots of books coming out soon that I think everybody should have on their TBR. Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner, In the Event of Love by Courtney Kay. I think there's just some amazing stuff coming out, and I can't wait. And I'm so excited about Adriana's lesbian second book. Cannot wait for that.
I've been a terrible romance. Oh, go.
You go.
I've been a terrible romance reader lately because I've just been like, one of the side effects of the pandemic is that in addition to reading a lot of romance, I've been reading a lot of horror. Because it's just like very cathartic for me, like because I get those scary, tense emotions and I release. So the last couple months I've been reading just a lot of like YA, like horror thriller types. Like I read Hell Followed With Us by, I cannot remember the author. I'm so sorry.
A.M. Miro?
No, it's three names. Alexander or something White, maybe.
I know who you're talking about, yeah.
But it's like it's like if you want to like have the cathartic feelings, it's like religious trauma, it's a trans mask hero, it's a pandemic plague, like it's a lot. But it was really good, like really, really good. And then I'm reading right now The Honeys by Ryan Lasala, and it's like, oh my, like his prose is phenomenal. And beyond that, like this, it's one of those setting as characters, like one of the best I've read recently, that like it's set at this rich people summer camp, and you can really feel like the muggy summer heat on your skin in every single page. And yeah, and the main character is genderqueer, and it's a really great examination of like grief and like what that looks like, and also the horror elements are kind of soft so far. I'm not quite done with it. I'm listening to the audiobook. I have like a couple hours left, but it's just like so good. It's just consuming me right now. So highly recommend those two, which are not romance but are also just amazing.
I have one I just recently read called Witchful Thinking by Celestine Martin, and it's a witch and a merman, and it's like a small town, and it's adorable and just like really sweet and really sexy and just like perfect for spooky season. And then I am reading now Ana Maria and the Fox, and that's by Liana de la Rosa, and it's Victorian romance set in London, and it's a group of sisters, 3 sisters that have to leave Mexico around the revolution, and then they kind of land in London. And Ana Maria is the oldest, and she ends up in a marriage of convenience because of reasons. And that one I am really reading right now and really enjoying.
I am on deadline, and when I'm drafting, I don't tend to read new books. I tend to reread like my favorite sections of books so that I don't get so wrapped up that I'm not doing the work I need to do. And one book, it's actually, I think, still on sale right now, so I wanted to sort of highlight it, that I was rereading part of it, was The Siren of Sussex by Mimi Matthews, which is a Victorian romance. And it's, I loved it. It's one of my favorite things I've read in the past several years. The male main character is a tailor, so like not a duke. He actually works for a living and like doesn't have a ton of money. And he is biracial, so he is Anglo-Indian. And Mimi sort of wrote a thread on Twitter about how sort of the experience being biracial, she draws from sort of her own experience of being, with her Indian and white background. And so it as far as class and as far as race, these are issues that come up, as well as gender issues, but it's also just beautifully written. It's incredibly swoony. Sort of the premise is that he needs to he needs business, or else he's going to go out of business. And then we have a woman, the female main character, who she needs to save her family. She needs to marry well. So they come to a deal that he will outfit her in these beautiful dresses, which will help her find a wealthy husband. And in exchange, her being in these beautiful dresses will help advertise his business. But of course, if she doesn't marry a wealthy husband, then that's kind of a problem. So, and it's really one of the best examples I've read of a book that is kisses only. There are no sex scenes in the book, but it's very, very sensual. It's hot while being kisses only. And that is a trick. And it's not a trick that most authors can pull off. And it is really well done. And she's a wonderful person, wonderful author. And I think it's on sale for $1.99. It's usually like $10.99 or something. So you might want to pick it up.
I love that. I'm gonna go like rewatch this later and just like frantically write down all of these recommendations. I know we're a little bit over the hour, but I just want to do a quick little elevator pitch, like what's next, of like what book is coming out, what you're working on, those types of things. So we can just rapid fire go around. Ashley, if you want to start.
Sure, yeah. I have Astrid's book, Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, is coming out in November, so just a little over 3 months, and it's about a renovation show and how Astrid is trying to be the head designer on this renovation show for this inn in Bright Falls, and a carpenter who is part of that family, and she's also the lead carpenter on it, Jordan Everwood, is not having her design plan at all, not putting up with it one bit. So they kind of clash on there, and then they don't clash a little bit, and then things happen. So yeah, that's out November 22nd. And then I just currently finished writing Iris Kelly's book. Iris is the third friend in the group. And so I'm not going to say much about that yet, although it is a fake dating trope. and another FF romance as well. And that is out, I believe, next fall, right now, 2023.
That's so exciting. Adriana?
I feel like I'm looking at Katie because, like me, she has 75,000 things that are happening in the next 10 months. I have my trad pub, On the Hustle. It's the second book in my Dating in Dallas series, and that's coming out in October. And it's Alba, who's the best friend of Julia's from the first book, and she's an interior designer who hates her boss. She's a PA to a terrible, beautiful man, and she quits, and then he follows her to Dallas with a very, very tempting offer. So that's that. I have the Bonkers Romance coming out and later this year, August 1st for ebook, then kind of Octoberish for the hardcovers. Mine is like, I'm calling my Buffy fake fantasy, and then called the Hellmouth Guardian's Lover. And then I have the next Leonas. It's coming out in May of next year, and it's technically, the title officially is An Island Princess Starts a Scandal, and it's Manuela, who is kind of wild and trying to get her last hurrah in Paris before she has to marry, and she makes a bargain with the Duchess to show her all the places where you can be gay and free in Paris, and that's what they do.
I love it. I'm so excited. Olivia, what have you got coming up next?
November 15th, Shipwrecked is the third book and final book set in the spoiler alert universe. And starts on the page. Well, I mean, this isn't really a spoiler. It starts with a one-night stand. They are literally having sex in the first sentence of the book, which I enjoy doing. It was sort of an homage to, I actually grew up with a couple of books that started that way, and I'd always kind of enjoyed that. So Peter, who is an actor in LA, there's a Swedish woman who's visiting LA, and he meets her, and they have a one-night stand, and she hits it and quits it and leaves him before he wakes up the next morning, because she figures she will never see him again, because she's auditioning for a role in this blockbuster fantasy television show, Gods of the Gates, which is not Game of Thrones, but not Game of Thrones. And it turns out that it's just a chemistry audition where they're down to the final 2 or 3 people for these main roles. And it turns out the person that she's going to be auditioning against is, of course, because this is a romance, Peter, who is not happy that she left without a word. And then they get cast, and then they're going to be filming together on a desolate Irish island for 6 years. I told you I liked forced proximity, and I am not a liar. So that's why I did that to them. And then I'm trying to draft the first book in a new series. The setting is Harlot's Bay, sort of in southeastern Maryland. The idea is that this is a city that historically was settled by women who basically burned down their lives and sort of go there to sort of start over. And this female main character, Athena, is the messiest female main character I've ever written. She's angry, like really angry and depressed, and she has bought a spite house, which you should look up Boston Spite House so you can sort of see what I'm talking about. It's 10 feet wide, and she buys it out of spite. So you'll find out more, I guess, when I'm done writing it eventually.
I'm so excited. I've read Shipwrecked, and it's very good. And it does, in fact, start with a sex scene on the first page. It's wonderful. Katie, so last but not least, what have you got coming up?
Don't mind me just buying all of these books. Okay. I mean, I already bought some of them. So I, like Adriana, have a gajillion things. So I'm just going to stick with the Dark Olympus for organizational sake. Radiant Sin, which is book number 4, comes out in February. It is Cassandra and Apollo. It is like fake dating. It is like murder mystery, historical romance, house party kind of. Like, it's like very self-indulgent that I was just like, we're just gonna do it. We're gonna stick them in a house for a week-ish, and maybe there's a little bit of murder going on, but like, you know, they gotta figure out what's going on. They're fake dating for spy reasons. And then I'm editing right now book 6, which is wait, no, 5, book 5, that's how math works. Book 5, which is Cruel Seduction, which is Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Adonis, Pandora in an open polynaught. And I can't say much more than that, except that it is a marriage of convenience, enemies to lovers. Like, it's very delicious. It's probably the meanest, like, core couple I've ever written, and I live for how vicious they are to each other, and it's lovely. So yeah, that's the next couple that'll be out in August of 2023. So Dark Olympus.
Everywhere. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for all of these books. I'm so excited to read all of them. Thank you for hanging out with us today in celebration of Bookstore Romance Day. Go check out their website, the Bookstore Romance Day in general, because I know there are lots of events going on. Check your local independent bookstore because they have events going on, I'm sure. If you're in Cambridge, come visit and browse our blind date with a book display, which some of these are maybe on that display and you should figure out which ones. But thank you for hanging out with us and for joining us for this panel. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts, keep reading, keep loving romance, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.